this past weekend I visited the Contemporary Art Center. I was swarmed by a lot of people in robot costumes. I'm not really sure what was going on there, but many of you know. It was in honor of Nam June Paik's re-envisioning and reinstallation of his Metrobot sculpture. One of the real reasons I was there was to visit an installation and performance piece by MK Guth. I journeyed with the director of the School of Art, Kate Bonasinga, and wound our way up the crazy Zaha Hadid building to find MK sitting in a room, talking with people, collecting their memories, braiding them into her hair. Fireworks astronaut Deep Pool Venus drives home the power of art to encourage people to dig deep inside in order to reflect on their experiences and to stretch themselves to understand their experience and explain their experiences to others. MK is transitioned from an object maker in the mid-1990s to earning an MFA from NYU and has exhibited her work in the worldly institutions, Whitney Museum of Art, Boise Art Museum, Henry Art Museum, and of course, Cincinnati's own CAC. MK is represented by Elizabeth Leeds Gallery in Portland, where MK resides. You know, I met MK in 2009 and again last year, and I've stayed in track of her work ever since. I've been a fan, and I am so honored to invite her here tonight at DAP in our Visiting Artist Series. Please help me welcome MK Guth to the center.
Hello. University of Cincinnati College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning. Hi. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. I've been having a great week in Cincinnati. I'd like to extend special thanks to Joe Girondola for inviting me and Kate Bonasinga. And I'd also like to thank Stephen Maticio for inviting me to participate in the Memory Palace exhibition at CAC. And I'd also like to thank all the remarkable artists that I worked with this week, including Denise Burge, who I think is out there somewhere. Hey, Denise. It was amazing getting to know so many artists from the community and working with them in the production of the project Fireworks Astronaut Deep Pool Venus. So I have something to admit to all of you, and it might delight some of you, and it might horrify a few of you, but I really love Cincinnati chili. I love it so much that the chili that I make back in Portland, I use my father's Wisconsin, kind of central Wisconsin traditional chili recipe, and then I add Cincinnati chili spices to make my chili. So it's really neither a traditional Cincinnati chili, nor is it actually a Wisconsin chili. It's some kind of hybrid. And I think that this is a great metaphor for how I make, because I make in many different ways and produce art through various different disciplines. And I don't feel comfortable in any one category. Now, I could easily use terminology like intermedia, multimedia, transdisciplinary, and probably I fit best into transdisciplinary because I'm approach-based rather than discipline-specific. But I don't really care for categories, and I don't like categories when artists speak about their work, because I feel that what happens when you use a description like multidisciplinary, you truncate the conversation. It acts as a descriptive term or an umbrella term, so you don't have to talk about all the odd peculiarities that make up your practice, the things that don't fit within a kind of traditional art historical trajectory. So I'm going to stick with the Cincinnati chili metaphor. I think that works better for me. And it also is why I like to talk about art, I like my art to be talked about this way as well as other artists, more as a genealogy. And what I mean by that is I'm going to use that term in the way that Michel Foucault orders that term. And he describes a genealogy as gray, meticulous, and patiently documentary. He says that it operates on a field of entangled and confused parchment, on documents that have been scratched over and recopied many times. And I like that because I feel like my practice and most artists' practice is a toggling back and forth between ideas and mediums and modes of production. So on that note, I started out as a craftsperson working in mosaics, but I didn't fit the role of a craftsperson particularly well, even though I'm really attracted to process-oriented work and modes of making that take time. But the problem here is I'm a pretty lousy craftsperson. And part of this is because I'm a jack of all trades, but an expert of nothing. Or one of my colleagues and friends, Lydia Rosenberg, said this morning that sometimes it's easier in making art to come through the window or the chimney than it is to go through the front door. And I think often that's how I go about learning skills. I learn just enough in order to produce or fulfill a work of art. But I don't generally stick around with a particular medium or skill and kind of fine-tune it as a traditional craftsperson would. So I quickly moved into sculpture. But even there, I didn't stick around in making discrete objects for a particularly long period of time. In fact, it seemed like quickly I was moving into making objects that needed each other to create meaning, and also needed the space that existed between them to create a context for that meaning. So I guess I started moving into installation. And I should also tell you that I am the daughter of a shutterbug. My dad, throughout my entire life, my dad always had a camera in his hand, a still camera, a film camera, or in later years, a video camera. I felt like I was in the Truman Show in a way. He was always documenting our lives, like the most embarrassing moments when you're wearing striped shirts and plaid pants. That's all caught on film, which is really great for me. And he was a photographer, a documentary photographer in World War II. And I think that practice extended throughout his life, and he just felt comfortable with a camera in his hand. So it kind of was no surprise when all of a sudden media started to emerge in my work as well. Oh yeah, one more thing. I actually don't have an undergraduate degree in art. I have an MFA, and in fact, up to about 3 weeks ago, I ran an MFA program, but my undergraduate degree is in sociology, and I was in a program that was very research-oriented. And my focus was folklore and mythologies and labor. In particular, I was interested in how the introduction of women into the workforce during World War II shifted and changed the structures and systems of the work environment at that time. There's sound to this video.
Do you recognize the person in this photograph?
So let me just stop this. Does anyone know how to
Yeah, I do.
get the sound moving?
It's a guy that ripped off a bag from this woman in my neighborhood the other day, a couple days ago.
Well, you happen to fit the description of the person who assaulted this man. How would you like to respond to this charge?
I didn't assault this guy.
Can you guys hear that at all?
This woman was walking down the street, he grabbed her bag, and I ran after him and got the bag back. I didn't assault him. If anything, I was trying to do a good deed.
So at any point, did you strike this man?
After I got the bag back, I hit him a couple times with the bag. It's a little red bag.
So you admit then that you assaulted him?
No, I didn't assault him. I got the bag back after he stole it from this woman. The guy was a jerk. I mean, he was a full-on jerk. He ripped off this woman's bag. After I got the bag back, I hit him a few times 5 times with the bag. I mean, it was a little red bag. This did not do a lot of damage. Little bag. Just ripped somebody off.
So you say there was another woman there. Do you happen to know who this woman is?
She was walking in my neighborhood. I've never seen her before.
So you don't have anyone who can confirm your statement.
There was nobody else there. Nobody else saw what happened except this woman, me, and that guy. And I don't know who she is, but I'm sure if I found her, or if we found her, she'd back up my story. I got her bag back.
Well, right now this man is in the hospital. He's got severe bruises, lacerations, he's got a concussion, he's got a broken arm. This seems like a little more to me than just a few hits with a bag.
You know, I don't know what happened after he ripped off this woman's bag. I mean, maybe he got in another fight. I don't know. But I'm telling you, I hit him a few times with this bag. It did not give him a concussion. It did not, like, give him any abrasions or anything else. In fact, I hit him a few times and the guy ran off. I mean, you know, I don't know what happened after the fact. I don't know what kind of trouble he got in after he tried ripping off this woman's bag.
So what exactly were you doing before this incident?
I was walking home. Walking down the street, walking home.
So then you weren't out drinking or anything like that?
No, I was not out. It was mid-afternoon. Are you kidding me? No, I wasn't out drinking. What are you suggesting?
So again, ma'am, there is nobody that you know who can confirm your story?
This woman can back me up. This woman who I got her bag back. That woman, she can back up my story. I don't know who she is, but she's the witness.
Okay, so it's at so I did this for my thesis exhibition, my MFA thesis exhibition in 2002. And it's at this point where in my photos and in my video, the mythological site and the everyday site collides, affecting the representation of both, creating shifts and departures and alterations in how those representations operate. Okay. I seem to be telling you guys a lot of personal stuff today. I've told you that I actually don't have an undergraduate degree in art, that I really like Cincinnati chili, the whole thing about my dad. But even the site, this place of confession, that moment when you're talking to somebody and you give up something about yourself, and then they tell you something about yourself, that too plays into my work. And it started to emerge with a project in the summer of 2002 called Red Shoe Delivery Service, RSDS. I started this project the summer after graduate school with my then roommate, Molly Dilworth. She was a fellow grad in my program, and we ran it for about a year, and then the project kind of grew too big, and we invited another friend of ours and guy from our program, Chris Moss, to join us, and we ran it then over the next 4 years. Red Shoe Delivery Service, at its core, is a mobile project, or this is one aspect that we always run. We fill a minivan with red glittery shoes of every configuration, cowboy boots, flip-flops, clogs, you name it, we have it, every size. And we offer people free rides wherever they want to go. In exchange, they have to give us their shoes for the duration of the ride and take one of our pair of shoes, click their heels, and say, "There's no place like work. There's no place like Bi-Mart. There's no place like the pub. There's no place like the train terminal." And we take them there. When they click their heels and say, "There's no place like Federation Square," we edit that video footage, we edit them into their next location in a spiral of glitter and harp music. So while we don't really show documentation of our travelers, we show this video where they're magically being transported to their next location over and over again. We curate out the minivan. So wherever we go, there's an exhibition that resides in the minivan, and it's called Mobile Home. And we give artists, usually we work with artists from the city we're in, or sometimes we'll work with artists from the previous city. And we give them an essay by Salman Rushdie on the Wizard of Oz. And this essay really is a meditation on home. And what Rushdie is asking is, what is home? Is it the place that you originate from? Is it a construction? Is it in the mind's eye? And we ask artists to respond to that, and they'll make work for our van. We do this in part to give us something else to talk about in the van besides the conversations that we work at creating with our passengers. So this is a piece by Jill Oldegard. This was for when we were in New York with the Swiss Institute. She did a set of rugs for the minivan. This is actually one of my favorite pieces. This is by a guy, Charlie Sublett, and he took photographs of his neighborhood, he's a photographer, and made transfers, like these see-through transfers, and put them all over the minivan windows. So no matter where we went, you were looking out the window and you were seeing Charlie Sublett's neighborhood. We work with performance artists. This is Shrug. They're a group out of London. When we did a project in Nottingham, England with the Not Dance Festival, and it's a festival of interactive visual and performance art curated by Guardians of Doubt. They rode for the first few days in the back of our van, and they offered passengers biscuits and tea, but they refused to talk to them. So it was both kind of welcoming and distancing all in the same breath. But especially the first day, they definitely helped us get people to participate, because when you design a project based on the thing that you fundamentally learn you shouldn't do when you're 5 years old, which is get in a car with strangers, it's fairly challenging to get people involved. So they told us at the end of our first day, where we had such a hard time getting anyone, that we should stop offering people a ride, that was kind of derogatory. It's like, oh, let me take you on a ride. Instead, that we should use the term lift. So the next day, we started offering people a lift, and sure enough, people started participating in our project. But what we learned from that experience is that whenever we traveled to a location that was not familiar to us, that we needed to learn the etiquette and the culture and what was going on in that city, or we were going to not interact with them in an authentic way or in a way that they were going to understand. We worked with a lot of performance artists. At the Melbourne International Arts Festival, we worked with 11 different performance groups. And while we often take people where they want to go, we usually have a little trip, side trip, that they have to go to first before they get to their destination. And this was one of them. This is a group called Home. They're a group of Melbourne artists. And for a day, as we were traveling people to different locations, first we would always take them to in front of the State Library, where Home was creating a corn feed throughout the day, and they could hang out and have some corn on the cob, and then we would take them to their next location. While Aris Diaz ran as a mobile project, it also ran multiple other projects as well. We did residencies. Oops, sorry about that. We did residencies. This one was with Glenbrook School. It was an elementary school in England. And we worked with the kids to do these large drawings and imagine places that they might want to go. And the outcome was Chocolate Land. Seemed to be the very most popular place where everybody wanted to go, where chocolate flows in the rivers and doorknobs are made out of Hershey bars. We ran installations, exhibitions, videos. In Melbourne, we also did an exhibition of all of the art that was in the van from all of our previous travels. We ran a virtual travel agency. These are some of our posters for our travel agency. So you could come to our virtual travel agency, and we had large books that had travel packages that you could choose from. Or really, you could go anywhere if we could find it on the internet. We would ask you to get on a stage, put on a pair of red shoes, and we'd take your picture, and then we'd print out a postcard of your travel experience. And on the back of that postcard, it had all the proper proper markings that a postcard has, so you could mail it to somebody. But the thing that was great about our travel agency is we really weren't limited by space or time. So you could go to 1928 Hungary. You could go to a bar in the Basque Country. You could shrink yourself down and be part of a Burger King Happy Meal. You could go to the moon, Germany, or you could insert yourself in some imaginary construct. This was Holly, and R.S. Dias ran this project for 28 days during the Melbourne International Arts Festival. And she was a university professor, and she had just turned 50 years old, and she was going on sabbatical, and she committed to coming to our project every single day and traveled to a different location, kind of trying on what it would be like to go to some, strange construct, or go to Paris, or go see go to the pyramids. She traveled all over, and the newspaper actually wrote an article on Holly's adventures. And Holly was amazing, and we really enjoyed her visits, but we also realized at this point that if we were successful at what we were doing, people would make the art projects their own, and they would take them over and do things that served them. Here's a wall of postcards. We did shoe stores. We did a shoe store for TBA, PICA's Time-Based Art Festival. PICA is Portland Institute for Contemporary Art. There we had storytelling, digital storytelling, multimedia storytelling lectures. You could come in and try on shoes. We started a large interactive, and this is difficult to show in a lecture, so I'm going to try to explain it to you. It was a interactive DVD where you could choose from one of these mini changing shoes, and each time you hit one, it would take you to a different story about one of our travelers. And we would take pictures of our travelers, and we would give them to writers, and they would write and extend the stories of these individuals, and then we'd do drawings and videos and animations. So it was a way of kind of going through the Red Shoe Delivery Service travels through this narrative structure. And we did dispatch centers. We did a lot of crazy things. This is one of the paintings in the shoe store. We put Red Shoe Delivery Service to sleep at the end of 2005, and I started a new project around the fairy tale Rapunzel, and I went back to video making. Fast forward that a little bit.
Of course, in retrospect, I see things differently. I should have been more proactive. Of course, in retrospect, I see things differently. I should have been more proactive. I should have been more proactive. I should have been more proactive. Of course, in retrospect, I see things differently. I should have been more proactive. Sent out letters and emails, joined chat rooms, posted ads in the newspaper, found a way to connect and participate, maybe join clubs and organizations, get involved with groups outside of my daily surroundings, meet new people. I should have met new people. But you need to understand that my world was very sheltered. Everybody around me thought about things in the same way. You know, you grow up and people expect you to do what your mother did or your father did or the people around you did. There are expectations. In a way, I felt like my world was preordained. I guess I bought into the story. I suppose I felt that no matter what I did, things would turn out the same way. Like it was all written down in a book somewhere. And all anybody had to do was turn to the last page, and voila, you'd discover exactly how my life turned out. Sure, there were things I wanted to do and places I wanted to go. New York City. Who doesn't want to go to New York City? I understand it's dangerous. I know I'm sheltered here, but I pay attention to what's going on. And anyway, all those people live there. Millions of people call New York City home. So really, how dangerous can it be? When I was young, I wanted to go to Paris. Do you remember that American in Paris? He seemed to have a remarkable time. It was so romantic and colorful. More recently, I've been into deep sea diving. I'm learning all this wonderful information about the ocean, and I would like to join the crew of the famous oceanographer, Steve Zissou. That would be an adventure. That would be an adventure. I know that I probably won't ever do these things. And that's okay. It's familiar here. It's comfortable. But sometimes I imagine that I am going to these places and I am doing these things. And it seems so real. So very real.
Second. That's in class.
Are we safe in here?
I doubt it. You still want to blow him up? I wonder if it remembers me.
So this is the first piece I did after R.S. Dias. And where R.S. Dias, we were able to kind of bring people into an imaginary site, right? So every time you put on the pair of shoes, all of a sudden you're out of the everyday, right? You're transformed out of the everyday and you become the performer. And that space in between is what was interesting for us. So that project was talking a lot about transformation, about risk-taking, about ideas of home. But it was talking about it in a really concise way that brought people into an experience, but their information wasn't going out so much. We were using writers to tell stories and so forth, rather than actually using the voice of the audience member. So once the Rapunzel project started, and it started with this video, that starts to shift in my work. Also, where the everyday is kind of the location that everything takes place, the work, the labor, the kind of using the taxi cab job as a way to make art. This starts out with this kind of delusional character who thinks the whole world is what she sees on television and probably should get out more and hang out with some people. The next set of braiding projects that I'm about to show you kind of reside in a fictional site in a little different way. So, I forgot to. But before I get to the braiding projects, with the video, I also did a series of lenticular images. And lenticular images are those photographs that if you look one way, they do one thing, and if you look another way, they do something else. You know, those postcards with like a hula girl, if you move them, her hula skirt shakes. That's how these photos work. So if you look in one way, it was a straight-on portrait. If you look the other way, the individual is holding a princess in their mouth. And these lenticulars were called Princess on the Tongue series. And at the time, I was interested in how we consume these kind of general notions of a mythic representation and personalize them and make them our own, even though they're owned by everybody. Much like inserting myself and turning myself into a Rapunzel character. So after this group, I decided I wanted to go back to interactive work, but I wanted to do it in such a way that the audience had a little more involvement in the making of the work or have a voice in the work. And it started out with our Rapunzel. This video's in the back. This took place at the Linfield University Gallery. And Chris Moss, one of my collaborators, was the curator at the space, and I'd been talking to him about this project the entire time we were doing R.S. Dias. And he's like, why don't you try it out at our university gallery? So it lasted for 2 months. The first month was interactive, And this is the outcome of the piece. And the rest of it, the second month, the piece just remained in the gallery as an object. So it started out where people could come in and write a regret or a desire on a ribbon, and I would teach them how to braid. And then they would come in and teach others. So I worked with students, faculty, community members from McMinnville. And over the days, people would come in and work. So now the work site itself is on display. So production becomes the art in the gallery. It shifts, there's this shifting point where it's both display and production. On Wednesdays, I would come in and bring in lunch, and people could come in and make their own work. We would talk, and we would decide on projects that we wanted to do in the afternoon. These are 3 of the students from Linfield that worked a lot in the project, teaching other people how to braid, and they decided to braid themselves together, and they would move throughout the campus creating different configurations. This is one of the pieces that the students made one day, the umbrella hat piece, and I think they were channeling Joe because it kind of looks like his hat. One Wednesday, they braided huge braids off of me and did a tug of war and a few other fairly intense things. This actually turned out to be a lenticular image. So this was the first time that I was really working without my other collaborators, and also working with the public in a different way, working with a community of students and faculty and local people to mount a piece. After that, I was invited to do a piece in Rio de Janeiro at Agente Carioca Gallery, and this piece was called The Way I See You, The Way You See Me, and it was interactive for a week. I studied Portuguese for 6 months to do this project, and luckily Brazilian people are very, very patient. But I was able to communicate on some basic level. And so I invited people to write on the ribbons their opinions of people from the United States. I hung a hammock in the space, so you could sit and read the braids before they went up into the architecture. And also the braid could be thrown out. This is not attached to me. This it's just a braid piece. This could be thrown out the window, and I would go down below. There was a little cafe bar and braid and ask people to participate. This is one of the few ribbons that's written in English. And what's lovely for me about this project is that the question is something that we're always saying that folks from other countries don't really like us that much. But in this piece, that information, when it traveled to the United States and started showing here, that information really wasn't accessible. So it kind of hinted at it, but you still couldn't grasp it unless you spoke Portuguese. Following this piece, I did my 3rd braid piece, and this was for the Whitney Biennial in 2008. So this piece, that year, the Whitney had a second space, and it was the Park Avenue Armory. And I had a choice to do a video piece in the Brewer Building, the main Whitney building, or to do an interactive piece in the Armory. And I chose the Armory because I liked the idea that you could return. So the Brewer Building, when you go there, it's pretty expensive. It's like $20 a pop to go see the museum, so people are less likely to come back and see a piece grow and evolve. Where the Park Avenue Armory was free. And so I thought it was a great opportunity to do a piece that changed shape over time. So this piece, this is kind of midway, actually started out and traveled across the country. The piece is called Ties of Protection and Safekeeping. And the location that I chose, I'm going to go back to that. The location that I chose was the Park Avenue Armory Library. This was designed by Tiffany and Company, and it's an incredibly dark, chunky library with glass cases that hold big awards and silver goblets and so forth. And it's really kind of the heart of the Armory, right? It's the library, it's the place where information is kept and archives are kept. So I wanted to ask a question that connected to the Armory building and connected to the space, because really this space and the Armory as a whole is a kind of an object in its own right with its own histories. And I felt it was too difficult to compete against that architecture and that history, so I wanted to do something that connected to it. So the question was, what was worth protecting? So I figure if the library is the heart of the armory, this would be a connection that would connect to its history. So as I was saying, it traveled across the country. It started out in the Portland Armory at the Girding Theater. It then went to the Cleveland Institute of Art. Each time it grew, and people were adding ribbons. It went to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, to the Atlantic Contemporary Art Center, to the Boise Art Museum, to Diverse Works in Houston, and finally to New York, where it was interactive for 10 days. This is my, the team of braiders. We're short one. There was another guy, Nicholas DiPaldo, so there was 5 of us that braided for the duration of 10 days. So you could come into the library and write on a ribbon, and we would weave it in. So at the point that it entered the Park Avenue Armory, it was 500 feet. So that's, and each day it grew more and more and more until it completely consumed the space. It's now over 1/3 of a mile long, and you can no longer see the trophies in the cases or the books. It really has consumed this contemporary notion of protection, has kind of consumed its site of history. And producing this piece, I was thinking a lot about Duchamp's Mila String and how the Mila String took over this salon exhibition, making it difficult to see the other works in the exhibition. And that was kind of the model I was working on for this piece. Afterwards, I make drawings, and I do this on a regular basis. These drawings come from the comments in the braids, and they're drawn. So these are tiny little braids that I draw, and the language is kind of knotted in there. So this is, if you can't read it, it says record album. But it's my way of kind of using that language and making other work out of it. And this is, I should say, this is an important part of my practice. When I do interactive work, I don't show documentation of it. I don't show in galleries or so forth pictures of people interacting. I usually make some other art form out of that, because for me, that interaction is particular, and just like what we're having right now, a photo or a video of this can't really it doesn't take into consideration if you didn't eat before you came to the lecture, how the space smells, the light that's shining in my eyes, the fact that you guys are looking at me and I'm looking at you. All of those things are lost. Our experience together is particular, and that's the way I look at interactive work. So I like to make objects out of those interactions that hold some of the residue of those experiences, or drawings, or photos, as you'll see, but don't try to illustrate what the interaction was. Become something else, offers up something else. This is the first piece that I did off my body. It was done at Yerba Buena. It's called I Still Feel the Same. It was for an exhibition called The Way We Rhyme. And the exhibition was all about feminist work and artists working in that tradition. And the question that I was asking people to respond to was, what was their opinion of the term feminist? And those would get woven in and extended off of my hair. You can see it in the back. So each time I do these projects now that are woven off my body, and I'm going to show you another one, I make uniforms, because the weight of the braids it's substantial. And I worked with an engineer at Portland State to do a template, so all of the uniforms carry the weight of the braid, so that I don't have to. So the uniform carries it, so it doesn't kind of pull on my neck. Afterwards, it was cut and was left in the gallery for the duration of the exhibit. But I'm not showing you a picture of that. I'm showing you a picture of this, because this is the same braid that was attached to me, but in another exhibition in Brooklyn. This was called Single Lady. It was curated by Kate Gilmore, and it was all artists working with kind of feminine imagery. So these pieces that come out of these interactive experiences have a life unto themselves afterwards, and they can travel and be something else and communicate the original project in a very different way, or maybe not communicate it at all. After that, I did a piece at the Elizabeth Leach Gallery called Terrain Change. And when I was in San Francisco, I was reading Henri Balzac's The Magic Skin, and I became really interested and fascinated with this curio shop that existed in this novel. And in the curio shop, there were famous works of art like Poussin paintings, and there were velvet couches and taxidermied animals, as well as jewelry and baubles and so forth. But because all of these things were together, they equalized everything. And what I mean by that is all of a sudden the Poussins had the same value as a taxidermied deer head or a velvet couch. And I was interested in how architecture and a space can tell us how to read what exists within it. So in this case, I removed all the lighting from the gallery and replaced them with groupings of chandeliers that kind of functioned as clouds. So the light in the space was all these kind of opulent, but very cheap chandeliers. And then on the floor were umbrellas made out of blankets and coats and mittens and hats. In the back was a video called Allegory of Possible Hopes and Fears. And the video was an indeterminate narrative that revolved around a mermaid whose lake had frozen over and an out-of-work logger. And the narrative kind of revolved around their codependent relationship. So, and this was the piece, this was my other option for the Whitney. I wasn't fancy enough to be in both spaces, I only could choose one. After this, I went back to yet another braiding project. I was invited to do a piece for the Lower Manhattan Council and Under the Radar and the World Financial Center. And it was called This Fable is Intended for You, a Work Energy Principle. And in this piece, it started out with a 6-month residency, and people from Lower Manhattan could come in to this space, which was a residency space. It was an old florist shop, and donate materials. So t-shirts, curtains, towels, you name it, we got it. And Molly came and helped me with this project, and each day in the residency, the materials would shift and change. So they would come in, they would get stacked, then they would get cut down, then they would get sewn together, and eventually they were braided into rope. So you could come throughout the duration of the 6 weeks and watch this labor occur, or come in and interact with us. And the other important thing about this particular piece is Molly and I worked in unison. It was kind of like a truncated Bugsby Berkeley performance. When she sewed, I sewed. When she cut, I cut. So the labor itself was choreographed. The ropes were then attached to a series of backpacks and to 24 volunteer performers. And we did a 4-day performance for Under the Radar, where the 24 individuals had 60 feet of rope attached to their backpack, and then another 15 feet in the backpack. And as a bugle player played a series of notes, it would tell them which configurations to make. So they would move throughout the space, the duration of an hour, shifting and making geometric configurations that mimicked the designs of the architecture. So above this is a glass atrium, and so they would be mimicking the designs in the tile or the shapes that they found that came out of the glass atrium top. Go. This is from above. And did this while they were all connected to each other, so they had to all work in unison. Again, kind of Busby Berkeley. There was also an exhibition space at the World Financial Center, and in there were elements from the residency, like the shirts that are hung in the back and the cubes with the fabric in it. And it was also the site where the performers would come every day, grab their backpacks, load up, and go in to perform. And then at the end of the day, they would come back and leave their backpacks there. So again, the gallery space is both a space of display, but it's also a work site. It's a place of production. At the end, the ropes came back to my studio, and over the last few years, I'm continually, because this is a slow process, weaving them into various different vessels. Okay, this is the second piece that I did off of my body, and this was in 2011. And it was called Best Wishes, and it was done at the P3 Studio Gallery in the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Las Vegas. And this piece, you can see me in there. The braids are coming off of my body, and they're attached to the architecture in the space. This was 21 days long, so you could come into the space. It was Las Vegas, you know, so I was asking people for their wishes, and they could have their wishes woven into the hair, which was extending off of my body. For those of you who came down to the CAC, there's Lydia Rosenberg. She was helping out with this project as well. And people could come in and sit on cushions and talk and discuss and talk about what they wanted, their desires or aspirations. Or they could move to the other side where there was tables and they could sit down and write on the tables. After 20 days, on the 20th day, at the end of the day, my hair was cut, and then the piece remained in the gallery for the duration of the show as an object. I also have to say, every day that I came in, those braids were attached to me the entire time. So I would come in, Lydia and the other people who were helping with the project would weave my hair up into the architecture. I would stay like that till the end of the day, where we'd wind me up into my jacket, and off I'd go to my room. By the end of that time, I was pretty much carrying the braid in a wagon that we decorated. So it was a cute wagon. But at the beginning of the 20th day, I went out into the hotel and out into Las Vegas and did a series of photographs that kind of turned me into a mythic character. This is in the chandelier bar. That is 3 stories high of chandelier. That's far too much chandelier. You can like hang out up top and hide in the chandelier. It's crazy. But it felt like it fit the character. I went into the desert, into Red Rocks, and so these are 3 of a much larger series. And then at the end, it came back to my studio and was woven into an object, and now this object shows all on its own. So again, it kind of has what I like about it is it has the authority of an object that you can get around and move around and is tactile. And it may talk about the early aspect of the project, but really it's its own piece and doesn't compete with the initial interaction. The final body of work that I want to show you is When Nothing Else Subsists, Smell and Taste Remains. And this piece I did for the Marylhurst University Gallery. It's called the Art Gym. And it's kind of this is the absolute opposite of what I had been doing. So before I was mounting interactions that mounted objects or images, where this was more objects and texts that implied or suggested or prompt an interaction. So there was sound pieces throughout the space. You could sit on the stumps, and the mics, I don't know if you can see those, the mics that are hanging down, people were talking about their memories around food, and these were good memories and bad memories and things about fancy meals and potlucks and Andy Warhol. All of them kind of trailing and combining together. And then there were these series of books and objects that combined to suggest a dinner. So for example, this is a dinner for John Cage. So on the shelf there was a book that gave the instructions for a dinner for 10 people. In it there were recipes, and next to the book was a book that has the composition Mushrooms at Variations. So John Cage was an avid mushroom hunter. He started the Mycology Society in New York. And this particular composition also had hidden in it a series of mushrooms names. So I got permission from the foundation, from the Cage Foundation, to use the composition. So every time this dinner is activated, the 10 people will perform compositions at mushrooms. And they will use the bronze ladle that has the names of the mushrooms that are hidden in the composition to serve their soup, because there's mushroom soup as one of the recipes. There was a dinner for the woods. There was a dinner for an artist. That particular piece is based on a Toulouse-Lautrec, a famous Toulouse-Lautrec dinner. So Toulouse-Lautrec was a remarkable cook, and he would throw these big dinner parties with his then gallerist. And one of the more famous ones, at the end of the dinner, he invited all of the people into the parlor for dessert. And he unveiled this painting of this new emerging artist, Degas, to all of the people at the dinner and said, "This is your dessert. That a full meal should entice every sense." So this particular piece is designed to. It has all the recipes are Toulouse-Lautrec's, and it's designed to introduce a new artist to a new community. So you can bring a bunch of friends together and introduce them to somebody's new work. There was a dinner for a funeral. This piece was based on Alain Pousquet poem called "A Choice Implies a Funeral." So there's a big knife. The dinner was a really meaty and bloody, kind of chunky dinner, but also the poem itself, "A Choice Implies a Funeral," really is about that space after you make a decision. So like you decide you're going to graduate school, all the other decisions, right, they fall off. And you've got this one decision. So it's kind of that in-between space, that liminal space when you're celebrating the beginning of something new and kind of saying goodbye to something old. And then the participants of this dinner would read a poem by Czesław Miłosz on the table, actually 2 poems on the table. So it's a way of bringing people into, there's a narrative that goes on here. Each dinner has a different set of instructions. A dinner for getting lost has no recipes, and it's all about inviting people who don't know each other. So everybody has to invite somebody else. It's the book. The shelves or the objects would hold all their texts that maybe connect to the dinner. Got to bring in a little Joni Mitchell. That was awesome. And then finally, there was a huge table in the center of the gallery. And this was put there. It was filled with books that connected to all the various different dinners. There's several others that I didn't show you. But it was also a place for people to go and sit and to hang out. And so you could take the books off the shelves or off the objects and go and read them. And the reason I put in a table is because one of the things about a gallery space, I think we all know this, is we know how to behave. So the spotlights and everything tells us what to look at. It tells us that the work in the space is special and probably shouldn't be touched. But the one thing about a table is that its function is more dynamic than the power of the gallery space. So the chairs were old and upholstered so that people really would use it and would sit down and would read and would take things off of the shelves and maybe take their cameras out or their phones out and poach the recipes, right? And then the final piece is this, and I'm just showing you this because this is kind of what I'm working on in my studio right now. I have some other interactive projects going on, but this in particular is, it's a dinner for a bowl. It was for a craft museum, the Contemporary Craft Museum in Portland, Oregon, and I did it with the artist Carl Berkheimer. And now I'm working on a series of dinners that actually are carry-out dinners. So it's an art object in a box that you can take along with you. So the instructions are in the book, and then there are objects to use to incite a conversation or an interaction. And in these, I don't know if you can really read that. So there's instructions for conversations etched into the spoons. So they give each of the participants in the dinner something else that they need to discuss. So anyway, this is all I'm showing you today. I want to thank you all for coming to listen to me. And hey, do you have any questions? Giving us some light. Gonna take that spotlight off my eyes. So, any questions?
Question.
I'm up for anything.
Maybe can you talk about the process here? How do you come up with what you are going to prompt people with a piece like at the CAC? Is it based on something you're feeling or something
Okay.
coming up or environment or a city or?
So the piece, has anyone seen the piece or interacted the piece at the CAC? Fantastic. Thank you. Did you write a ribbon? Excellent. So, and I should have talked about this as part of the talk, but that particular piece was also off of my body. And I was, since it was part of the Memory Palace, it was exhibition. I was asking people to write something that they didn't want to forget, or a memory onto a ribbon, and that would be woven into my hair and extended, and with each additional comment, the braid would grow longer and longer off of my body. So in that, there were categories. So fireworks was celebration and joy. Astronaut, so the title was Fireworks, Astronaut, Deep Pool, Venus. So fireworks, joy and celebration. Astronaut, travel and adventure. Deep pool was sorrow and loss, maybe somebody you want to remember or something you want to remember. And then the last one was love. So people could write based on those categories, but most comments can go into any categories, really. They can be mixed up, which I realized towards the end, because you can miss somebody and love somebody at the same time. So it's really a choice of where you want to locate yourself in the braid and the color that you want to choose. And Stephen knows this. It's a Greco-Roman mnemonic device. That's what a memory palace is. And in the writings about it, in the rules about a memory palace, one of the things that it suggests is that to remember something, and so let me just say, a memory palace is an architecture, or the method of loci, right? And it is suggested to remember something that you would place it in an architectural space, into a building, and then you could, when you wanted to retrieve that information, you could move through that building and go to the shelf and retrieve your memory. And so there's a set of rules for memory palaces, and one of them is color. So you don't want anything too banal. You want something that is garish or outrageous or extremely beautiful. And so that's why the colors of the braids are neon colors and bright. So when I say the category isn't wholly important, I mean that because it's important to remember the color, because that's how you'll retrieve the memory later on. So after the 4 days where people were coming in to add their comments to the braid, then it's cut and now it's hung at the CAC. And I hope you all go to see it and go to see the exhibition. It's a lovely exhibition. I'm really honored to be part of it. And then that piece will eventually go home and also be woven into an object. But much like the other braid projects, the labor is on display for a portion of it. There's interaction, but there's also work. There were 8 other artists working on this piece at all times. Denise was one of them. Is anyone else here who was working on the project? I'm curious. John? Hey, John. So again, labor is on display, process is on display. It's part of the piece, and it's choreographed. And at the end, that falls off and an object emerges. How's that? Sure. Let's see. There is a social practice program at Portland State. So I should say this right now. I don't locate myself there. And the reason that I don't locate myself there is because my work also is connected to objects. So these interactions make objects, or the objects create interactions. Where social practice, that department is really focusing on purely interactive and socially engaged work. However, it's a really interesting program. There's also a visual studies program there that is multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary. That's also a great program. That's actually at PNCA, Pacific Northwest College of Art. So there's, as far as social practice, there are programs as well as multidisciplinary programs. But to be there as an artist, one of the things that's great about Portland is there's a really energetic young artist community. There's a lot of DIY going on. And what I mean by that is the artists aren't waiting for anyone to show them, they're showing each other. They're mounting exhibitions in alternative spaces, they're creating alternative spaces, and they're writing about each other, which is one of the things that I find really exciting. John Knight here actually ran a gallery while he was in graduate school called H. Klum Fine Arts, with another artist, Lydia Rosenberg. And they brought in people from out of town, they brought in people from the program, they brought in artists from the city. So, and it all took place in John's apartment, which was pretty great, but probably not so easy for you. Yeah. So that's one of the pluses about Portland. It's an active, young art scene, and there's multiple levels of kind of community there. So there's emerging artists, there's young artists, emerging artists, and very established artists. There's galleries, there's Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, which is their time-based art festivals going on right now. It's not cheap. It used to be. It's not so much anymore. It's getting a little more expensive all the time. And it's a community not completely dissimilar to Cincinnati, and that a lot of, there's a lot going on and a lot being created by the artists themselves. Did that answer your question?
You mentioned that you were really interested in mythology and like storytelling, and you definitely did with Rapunzel. Is there any aspect of mythology that you find yourself like gravitating towards?
So I focused on certain works. I've worked, I've worked in kind of domestic imagery, which is a mythological site as well. And when I think about mythologies, I'm not just thinking about fairy tales, although I'm showing that type of work now. I worked a lot for several years with superheroes. And most of what I like about mythologies or folklore or pre-existing narratives is once you insert yourself into them, you simultaneously destroy them, because you've now broken them up and made room for individuality. And what I mean by that is kind of how Roland Barthes kind of talks about myths as a kind of collapsed structure, right? So they're so general that anybody can kind of understand them. You can get them, Spider-Man always functions the same way, even though he has some foibles, they're always the same foibles. But as soon as you insert yourself into some kind of mythic representation, that breaks it apart, disrupts it in such a way that the myth no longer operates in the same way, because you've kind of broken it, but also that everyday representation doesn't work in the same way either. So what's interesting for me about mythologies is that they become an entry point for the audience, because there's certain narratives that are pretty general that people understand. So it's a way to kind of engage the work and understand it. And it's also a way to take something that's kind of remarkable and fantastical and combine it with the everyday, so that this kind of more prosaic experience shifts and it looks different and it suggests other possibilities. If I can be a superhero, then any of you guys can be a superhero. If I can be transported via some red glittery shoes, albeit in a minivan, then maybe the everyday is not so banal, and maybe there's something in it that can be kind of remarkable, and that the mythology can actually be a real experience. Did you have one, Denise?
Well, I was interested in the vessel concept. You talk about how the braids are sort of woven. Sometimes they've been woven into these really misshapen vessels, and the fact that they're misshapen makes me connect them to their unwoven parts, the parts that aren't part of the vessel, and makes me think of, well, the hair is already a vessel because it's holding, the written on material, and you're kind of a vessel because you listened and,
Right, I'm definitely a repository. I wasn't kidding about those confession things. I was trying not to hammer that too much, but whenever these interactive projects occur, people are telling you a lot of information. They're confiding in you. So,
I guess it's more of a comment than a question, but I really respond to the openness of the vessels, because it opens you back out into the process as being itself a vessel. And so I don't know, maybe I guess there's a question in there somewhere, like, do you think about the vessel in that way?
well, I think most of these projects are a vessel for content, right? And it's a way, yeah, so I see them as kind of holding the content of the project, if that answers the question. So if we look at anyone who participates, those who write on a braid, write on a ribbon that gets inserted in a braid, or rides with Aris Diaz, or interacts in any way, at that point, the project's really active, right? You're an activated, Rancière would call you an emancipated spectator. You're activated, you're doing something, you're not just contemplating visually the work. And Rancière also calls that kind of artwork this way as a combination of storytellers and viewers, and that they blur the line between the two. So sometimes you're the storyteller and sometimes you're the viewer. But when it comes, and that's in the active part of the piece, when you're interacting. When they're woven into vessels, or they're turned into photographs or a video, then that's a far more contemplative experience, and that's a different experience overall when you come to the work. And I like how both of them can operate in an overall body of work. And I'm interested in how something can have multiple lives. So an artwork can be interactive at one moment, an installation at another moment, and an object at a third, all offering up different entry points to content and subject matter. Thank you.